There were only a couple of days left before the wedding, and we were just about to put the finishing touches on everything. The past few weeks had been a whirlwind of planning, decisions, and last-minute adjustments. But we were almost there, just a few more things to iron out before the big day. After wrapping up my work at the hotel, where I'm an administrator, I decided to head over to the banquet hall. The event was being set up in the same hotel, which made things pretty convenient for us. The hall was where the whole wedding would take place, and I wanted to make sure everything was perfect. I'd arranged to meet with the staff to go over the final details, just to ensure nothing was left to chance. When I arrived at the hall, the employees were already waiting for me. These were people I worked with every day, so I trusted them to handle the preparations with care. But something felt off. My fiancé and the wedding planner were supposed to be there too, going over the final touches with us. It wasn't like them to be late, especially with the wedding just around the corner. But I brushed it off, thinking maybe they were held up discussing something important or making a last-minute decision. I decided to take a quick break and head to the restroom before diving into the details with the staff. I figured I'd check in with my fiancé and the wedding planner afterward. No big deal, right? Just a routine stop before what I expected to be another routine meeting. But when I pushed open the restroom door, nothing could have prepared me for what I saw. There, at the far end of the room, were my fiancé and the wedding planner. But they weren't just standing there, chatting or going over details for the wedding. No, they were wrapped up in each other's arms, locked in a passionate embrace, kissing like they were the only two people in the world. My heart felt like it stopped. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe, couldn't even think. All I could do was stare, stunned, as the scene played out in front of me. It wasn't just a kiss, either. It was the kind of kiss that makes you realize everything you thought you knew about someone was a lie. They didn't even notice I'd walked in, too caught up in each other to realize I was standing there, watching my world fall apart. In that moment, I did the only thing I could think to do. I fumbled for my phone, snapped a photo, and then turned and left as quickly as I could. I nearly collapsed right there in the hallway. It felt like the floor had been ripped out from under me, like I was falling into some kind of dark, bottomless pit. But I couldn't lose it. Not there. Not in front of everyone. I had to keep it together, at least until I was alone. Somehow, I found the strength to walk out of the hall, out of the hotel, and out to the parking lot. I practically stumbled to my car, my mind racing, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst. I sat down behind the wheel, gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. I could barely catch my breath, trying to process what I'd just seen. You see, Em and I have been together for what feels like forever. We started dating when we were both just teenagers, back in college. We met during freshman year, both a little lost, trying to figure out who we were and what we wanted from life. I still remember the first time I saw her. She was standing in the library, struggling to reach a book on a high shelf. I grabbed it for her, and that was it. We were inseparable from that moment on. We grew up together, learned together, and fell in love along the way. We shared everything: dreams, fears, plans for the future. I thought we were solid. I thought we were the kind of couple that would make it through anything. We'd been through so much already. Long nights studying, the stress of finding jobs after graduation, the ups and downs that come with trying to build a life together. But this was different. Not long after we both started our careers, I decided it was time to take the next step. I proposed in the same hotel where I work, in one of our most beautiful, private spots, with the city skyline as our backdrop. It was perfect, or so I thought. She said yes, of course, and we dove headfirst into planning the wedding. My dad was a big part of it too. He's been my role model for as long as I can remember, the guy I always looked up to. When I told him about the proposal, he was thrilled. He offered to help out with the wedding, not just financially but also with the planning. My dad and I have always been close. He's not just my father, but my best friend. I trusted him completely, and having him involved in the wedding meant the world to me. Em worked at a wedding agency, so she knew all the right people to help make our day special. She introduced me to the wedding planner, Jay, a guy she'd known through work for a while. He was older, in his mid-30s, but he seemed nice enough. He had that confident, smooth way of talking that made you feel like everything was under control. With him on board, the preparations went smoothly. Between my connections at the hotel and his expertise, we were set to have the perfect wedding. After my fiancée and I started preparing for the wedding, life got pretty hectic. You know how it goes. Between our jobs and the endless details of planning the big day, we were constantly on the go. Em and I were both fully immersed in our work, trying to balance our careers with the demands of organizing a wedding. She had her job at the wedding agency, and I had my responsibilities at the hotel. It seemed like every spare minute was dedicated to making sure everything was perfect for our special day. But something changed along the way, and I didn't notice it at first. We were so focused on work, on the minutiae of wedding planning, that I didn't see how we were gradually beginning to distance ourselves from each other. It was subtle, small things that, in hindsight, should have raised some red flags. But when you're in the thick of it, it's easy to miss the signs. We were both so caught up in the whirlwind that I convinced myself it was just the stress of the wedding getting to us. We still had our moments, of course. The late-night talks about our future, the occasional dinner together when we could both find the time. But those moments were becoming fewer and farther between. Instead, we spent most of our time focused on logistics, on timelines, on everything but each other. I figured it was just part of the process. Weddings are stressful, right? I mean, everyone says that, so I chalked it up to that and kept pushing forward. But then, I started noticing something that didn't sit right with me. Em began to get closer to the wedding planner, Jay. At first, it made sense. They were working closely together to plan our wedding. But as time went on, their communication seemed to go beyond just wedding details. I'd catch her texting him late at night, or see that they were exchanging messages on social media more often than I thought was necessary. She always had her phone with her, and I noticed her smiling at messages a little too often. When I asked about it, she'd tell me they were just discussing work, that they had other clients they were planning weddings for, and it was easier to coordinate everything through social media. I tried to accept that explanation. Em was good at what she did, and I knew that planning a wedding, especially your own, can blur the lines between professional and personal, but still, something inside me was nagging at me, telling me that this was more than just work. There was this undercurrent of unease I couldn't shake, no matter how hard I tried. I should have trusted my gut. That little voice in the back of my head kept telling me something wasn't right. But every time I brought it up, Em had a reasonable explanation. She assured me that they were just working together to make our wedding perfect, that I had nothing to worry about. She was good at putting my mind at ease, but the doubts never completely went away. Work continued at a steady pace, and so did the wedding preparations. The hotel staff was on top of everything on my end, and I was grateful for that. But those nagging thoughts about Em and Jay's frequent communication still lingered. It wasn't just the texts and social media messages. It was the way she seemed so engaged when she was talking to him, more animated than she was with me lately. It was like she had more energy for him than she did for me, and that hurt. I didn't want to jump to conclusions, but I couldn't ignore what I was feeling. So, I decided to talk to someone I trusted more than anyone, my dad. He'd always been there for me, offering advice and support whenever I needed it. If anyone could help me make sense of this, it was him. One evening, I drove over to my parents' house. Em was busy with something wedding-related, so I had the perfect opportunity to visit my dad without her knowing. I didn't want to worry her, especially if this was all just in my head. My dad was in the living room when I arrived, reading one of his favorite books. He looked up when I walked in, immediately sensing that something was off. "What's up, son? You look like you've got something on your mind," he said, setting the book down and giving me his full attention. I sighed, running a hand through my hair as I sat down across from him. "Yeah, Dad, I do. It's about the wedding and Em." He leaned forward, concern etched on his face. "What's going on? Is everything all right between you two?" "I don't know," I admitted, feeling the weight of my doubts pressing down on me. "She's been acting different lately. She's been spending a lot of time with Jay, our wedding planner. I mean, I get that they need to communicate, but it's more than that. They're always texting, always talking. It's like she's more excited about planning the wedding with him than she is about actually getting married." My dad nodded slowly, taking in everything I was saying. He was always the calm, rational one, and I could tell he was thinking carefully about how to respond. "It sounds like you're feeling a bit insecure about their relationship," he said finally. But that doesn't necessarily mean something's wrong. Weddings can be stressful, and maybe she's just trying to make sure everything goes perfectly. You've both been so busy with work and planning. Maybe this is just a rough patch. Maybe, I said, though I wasn't entirely convinced. But I can't shake this feeling, Dad. What if it's more than just work? He reached across the table and put a hand on my shoulder, giving it a reassuring squeeze. Son, relationships go through ups and downs. You and him have been together for a long time, and you've made it through plenty of challenges. This could just be one of those times. The pressure of the wedding, the stress of everything coming together, it can make people act differently. But you can't let that doubt take over. Trust her, and trust the relationship you've built. You're so close to the wedding now. Just keep your head up and get through this. His words were comforting, but I still couldn't shake that gnawing doubt. I wanted to believe everything was fine, that Em was just caught up in the moment. But it wasn't that simple. Still, I nodded and thanked him for his advice, knowing that I'd have to find my own way through this. A couple of days passed after that conversation, and I tried to take my dad's words to heart. I threw myself even more into work, hoping that if I focused on the tasks at hand, I could quiet the doubts in my mind. I wanted so badly to believe that this was just a rough patch, that once the wedding was over, everything would go back to normal. But then, that moment came. The moment that would change everything. It was just an ordinary day, or at least, that's how it started. I was at the hotel, finishing up some last-minute details for the wedding. I'd been running on autopilot, going through the motions, trying not to let the thoughts of M and J's constant communication get to me. But as I moved through the hotel, preparing to meet with the staff in the banquet hall, I had no idea how much my life was about to be turned upside down. After I left the restroom, I was in a daze. My mind was racing, my heart pounding in my chest. I didn't know what to think, what to do. Everything felt like it was spinning out of control. I could barely catch my breath as I stumbled out of the hall and into the parking lot. I needed to get away, to clear my head, but all I could think about was the whirlwind of emotions crashing over me. By the time I reached my car, I was trembling. My hands shook as I fumbled for my keys, trying to get inside and away from everything. I felt like the world was collapsing around me, and there was nothing I could do to stop it. I sat there for what felt like hours, just trying to make sense of everything. The weight of the last few weeks came crashing down on me all at once, and I felt completely and utterly lost. What was I supposed to do now? What did all of this mean for the wedding, for my relationship with him, for everything I thought I knew? I didn't have any answers, just a sinking feeling that nothing would ever be the same again. And that's when it hit me, the realization that changed everything. It wasn't just about the wedding anymore, or the doubts I'd been wrestling with. It was about something much bigger, something that I'd been trying to avoid facing. I had to confront this head-on, no matter how much it hurt. There was no turning back now. Sitting in my car, I was overwhelmed by a whirlwind of emotions. Shock, anger, betrayal, and disbelief. Everything I thought I knew about him and our relationship had just crumbled right before my eyes. But even in that moment of despair, I made a decision. I wasn't going to let them see me break. No, I was going to play this smart. I'd pretend I hadn't seen anything, keep my composure, and wait for the perfect moment to get my revenge. The wedding was just a couple of days away. I had a plan, an insidious one, I'll admit, but considering what I'd just witnessed, it felt justified. I wasn't going to let them get away with this, not without facing the consequences of their betrayal in front of everyone we knew. I'd expose them both at the wedding, right in front of all our friends, family, and coworkers. It would be the ultimate payback. After sitting in my car for what felt like an eternity, I finally pulled myself together enough to drive over to my dad's house. I needed to talk to him, to tell him what had happened and get his support for what I was about to do. My dad had always been my rock, my guide through life's challenges, and I needed him now more than ever. But I also needed him to understand why I was planning to do something so drastic. When I arrived at my dad's house, I could feel the apathy starting to set in. It was like I was moving through a fog, everything around me feeling distant and unreal. I parked the car and sat there for a moment, staring at the familiar front door, trying to gather the strength to go inside. The tears I'd been holding back started to flow again, and for a second, I wasn't sure I could do this. But I had to. I had to tell him. As I walked into the house, my dad immediately saw the state I was in. He rushed over to me, his face filled with concern. Without saying a word, he pulled me into a tight embrace, and I just stood there, crying into his shoulder like I hadn't done since I was a kid. He didn't say anything, just held me until I finally started to calm down. When I could finally speak, I pulled back and wiped my eyes, trying to compose myself. "Dad, I need to tell you something," I said, my voice trembling. "Something happened, something really bad." He guided me over to the couch, where we sat down, his hand still resting on my shoulder for support. "What is it, son?" "Whatever it is, we'll get through it together." I took a deep breath, trying to steady my nerves. "I caught him with Jay," I said, the words tasting bitter on my tongue. They were kissing. In the restroom at the hotel. "I saw them, Dad." I took a picture. His eyes widened in shock, and for a moment, he didn't say anything. He just sat there, processing what I told him. Then, his expression hardened, a mixture of anger and sadness filling his eyes. "I can't believe it," he muttered. "I never thought she'd do something like this. Not to you." "I know," I said, my voice hollow. "And that's why I need to do something about it. I can't just let them get away with this, Dad. I'm going to expose them at the wedding. I'm going to show everyone what they've done." He looked at me, surprised by the intensity in my voice. "Expose them? At the wedding? Are you sure that's what you want to do?" I nodded, feeling a strange sense of calm settle over me. "Yes, it's the only way. They need to be held accountable for what they did, and I want everyone to know the truth." He hesitated, clearly struggling with the idea. "I understand why you're angry, son. Believe me, I do. But are you sure this is the best way to handle it? This could cause a lot of pain, not just for them, but for everyone involved." I looked him in the eyes, determined. "Dad, I've thought about this, and I know it's going to hurt, but they need to face the consequences of their actions. They've betrayed me, and I can't just let them walk away from this like nothing happened." He sighed, running a hand through his hair. "All right. If this is what you're set on doing, I'll support you. I just want you to be sure this is the right thing for you." "Thank you," I said, feeling a small sense of relief. "I know it's extreme, but it's the only way I can move on from this." We talked for a while longer, going over the details of my plan. My dad wasn't thrilled about it, but he understood where I was coming from. He knew how much this had hurt me, and he wanted to be there for me, even if it meant supporting a decision that was as drastic as this one. After our conversation, I headed back home, where Em was waiting for me. I wasn't sure how I was going to face her, knowing what I knew, but I had to keep it together for just a couple more days. When I walked in, she didn't even ask how I was doing or why I hadn't been at the final preparations for the wedding. She just went about her business, acting as if everything was perfectly normal. It took everything in me not to confront her right then and there, but I kept my cool, pretending I hadn't seen anything. I spent the next couple of days in a daze, going through the motions as if nothing had happened. Em and I barely spoke, and when we did, it was all about the wedding. I kept telling myself that I just had to get through these last few days, and then it would all be over. The day of the wedding was fast approaching, and I knew it was going to be the hardest day of my life. But it would also be the day I finally got my revenge. And then, the wedding day arrived. The venue was beautifully decorated, just as we'd planned. Guests began to fill the hall, all dressed in their finest, ready to celebrate what they thought was going to be a joyous occasion. I went through the motions, greeting guests, making small talk, all while a storm raged inside me. I couldn't stop thinking about what I was about to do, about the moment when everything would come crashing down. The ceremony itself went off without a hitch. We exchanged vows, put on our best faces, and pretended like everything was perfect. But inside, I was counting down the minutes until the reception, when I would finally expose Em and Jay for what they really were. As the reception began, I could feel the tension building. I knew what was coming, and I was ready. I kept a close eye on Em and Jay, watching their every move, waiting for the right moment. Finally, after the first dance and a few speeches, it was time for me to make my move. I grabbed the microphone, my hands shaking slightly as I held it up to my mouth. The room quieted down, and all eyes were on me. Em looked at me with a smile, completely unaware of what was about to happen. "Thank you all for being here today," I began, my voice steady despite the chaos inside me. "I know this is supposed to be a day of celebration, but there's something I need to share with you all." I paused, letting the tension build. The room was silent, everyone waiting to hear what I had to say. "Today was supposed to be the start of our new life together," I continued, turning to him. "But there's something I need to tell you, something I need to tell everyone here." I nodded to the person operating the projector, and within seconds, the photo I'd taken of him and Jay flashed up on the screen behind me. There was a collective gasp from the crowd, followed by murmurs of disbelief. Em's face went pale, her eyes wide with shock, and Jay looked like he wanted to crawl under a rock. "This," I said, my voice filled with anger, "is what they've been doing behind my back. My fiancée and our wedding planner, together. While we were planning this wedding, they were betraying me." The room erupted into chaos. Guests were shouting, some trying to console Em, who had fallen to her knees, sobbing uncontrollably. Jay was trying to slink away, but he wasn't going to escape that easily. My father, standing near the back, gave me a nod of approval, silently supporting my decision. But as I looked around the room, at the shock and devastation on everyone's faces, I realized something. I didn't feel the satisfaction I thought I would. The darkness and indifference I'd felt earlier had taken over completely, leaving me numb to everything around me. The revenge I'd been so desperate to get didn't bring me the closure I'd hoped for. Instead, it just left me feeling empty. I threw down the microphone, not caring about the fallout, and walked out of the room without looking back. I didn't know where I was going, but I knew I couldn't stay there any longer. I'd exposed the truth, but in the process, I'd lost everything that mattered to me. As I stepped out into the cold night air, I realized that revenge might have given me a moment of satisfaction, but it couldn't heal the wounds of betrayal. The people I loved had hurt me in the worst possible way, and no amount of payback could change that.